Hello, this is Jay McCluskey, and happy to welcome you to the third in our studies in Deuteronomy. Actually, it's lesson number 2 because we called the introduction study lesson 0, and we're coming to a part in the middle of Deuteronomy chapter 1, where, as the nature of Deuteronomy, looking back in order to move forward, Moses gathers that generation of people right there at the border in Moab to cross into the promised land. And he calls them to look back at what their ancestors had done when they were at a similar place. It's interesting, you go to some place historical, and though you've known the stories of it, it can be moving and meaningful in a deeper way. You know, I had heard the story of D-Day in World War II many times in different avenues of the story, seeing renderings of that. And then you go to Normandy. I went to Normandy on a tour of France some years back and stood on Omaha Beach and just tried to imagine and just made a covenant. You know, we would not forget the sacrifices that were made there in the name of liberty and freedom. It's very moving to be at that same place. Well, geographically speaking, the Hebrew children Moses is talking to in this text are not at the same place that their parents had been at a place called Kadesh, Barnea. But they were both on the border of the promised land, and they were both at the same place with a great opportunity before them. And their parents had made the mistake and not moved forward in faith, as we'll see in the story. And of course, Moses' urging to this new generation is to have faith and trust the Lord where their parents had failed before. There's a lot of scripture that we're going to read. I do hope that you have picked up the outline of this lesson, and you can download it from a space on our church website, or you can ask the church office and we'll be happy to supply those for you. So we're beginning at verse 19 of chapter 1. Then as the Lord our God commanded us, we set out from Horeb and went toward the hill country of the Amorites, through all that was vast and dreadful wilderness that you have seen, and so we reached Kadesh Barnea. Then I said to you, you have reached the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving us. See, the Lord your God has given you the land. Go take possession of it as the Lord your God of your ancestors told you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. And of course, as we see in the story, they ended up being afraid and very discouraged, and the discouragement really went contagiously through the whole lot of them. Now, as it say, they left Horeb to go to Kadesh Barnea. We covered this a few lessons ago, just seeing if you remember how long of a journey was it between Horeb or Mount Sinai and Kadesh Barnea, and that would be 11 days. So they have broke camp, they've hiked, they've moved for 11 days. Now they are at this border of opportunity here as Moses is recalling this story in the past. Some lessons that we might gain and learn from this as we go through the outline. First is, God calls us to walk by faith and not sight. The more familiar they end up getting with this place that they are to go and conquer, the more intimidating that it would seem. And in preparation, they send over some spies, 12 spies, and the story of that Moses includes. Then all of you came to me and said, let us send men ahead to spy out the land for us and bring back a report about the route we are to take and the towns we will come to. The idea seemed good to me, so I selected 12 of you, one man from each tribe. They left and went up to the hill country and came to the valley of Eshcol and explored it. And as I read that in Deuteronomy, it seems like, well, they didn't ask God about this. This reconnaissance team was part of their thinking. They needed to do this. This is something that they thought would be. But you need to take a collective look at the Bible, because you go back to the book of Numbers, where this story is told in kind of real time, not in reflection from Moses. It says, the Lord said to Moses, send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites, each from each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders. So God is in on the decision, and we really are wrestling here, and there's just not clarity about whether these spies, this reconnaissance team that would go in and check things out, whether this was the perfect will of God or whether it was the permissive will of God, whether God is accommodating them. Well, I'll give them a sneak peek. God didn't need reconnaissance. He knew that the land was flowing with milk and honey. He knew what people lived there. He knew what fortifications there were on their city. He knew how they could be defeated. But maybe this was part of just allowing the people and their fears and their uncertainty of things that they might come back with greater encouragement. Of course, we know the opposite takes place. So I don't have a clear answer on that. I just say this: whether it's the perfect will of God or the permissive will of God, it still requires us to walk by faith. We can't see every answer. We don't know what's around every corner. We don't have answers to every question. We know later that there are spies that will go from the generation that Moses is talking to that will be in Jericho. We have the Rahab story about that. So it's kind of like it's not that it's a bad idea, but is it God's perfect will? Is it a permissive will? Either way, the bottom line is we still have to walk by faith and not by sight. That's the lesson one. Second lesson, God's words are accurate and reliable, because when those 12 spies go out from Kadesh Barnea, they return, and it says, taking with them some fruit of the land, they brought it down to us and reported, it is a good land the Lord is giving us. And the same kind of expression there from the story as it's told in the book of Numbers. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. And I want to introduce you to a couple of my little friends here. This is usually in my study at church. This is a pastor's version of action figures, I guess. They're made out of olive wood. We picked them up on one of our Holy Land trips in probably Bethlehem, which is known for its olive wood carvings. And Joshua and Caleb, they are called. And part of that story is they bring a cluster of grapes that's so big it takes two of them to carry it, between the two of them. So this is my Joshua and Caleb, and it is a reminder that God told them it would be a land of milk and honey and great fruitfulness, and they come back and say, it is. Here is its fruit, and just a reliability. The old hymn says, 'tis so sweet to trust in Jesus, just to take him at his word, and God's word is always reliable. And when they come back, I kind of like the spirit that they have. It was in that verse 25 at the end. A good land the Lord our God is giving us. We're in. God's going to do this. Their faith at that moment. The excitement of what could be theirs was strong. But once they started talking about how the fortification of the cities and the size of the armies and the imposing opposition against them, their faith faded, and they walked more by sight than they did by faith, which brings us to the third point, and that is sin is rejecting the belief that God is loving, because their response isn't this is hard, and it's really not even it's too hard. It is God has betrayed us. Look at how he says, Moses tells the story, you were unwilling to go up, you rebelled against the command of the Lord your God, you grumbled in your tents and said, and I underlined it for you, the Lord hates us, so he brought us out of Egypt to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites and destroy us. Where can we go? Our brothers has made our hearts melt in fear. They said, the people are stronger and taller than we are. The cities are large with walls up to the sky. We even saw Anakites there. And this really stings more than just this idea that this is tough, and it won't be easy, and we can't just walk right in and take it, because you are really saying God is a God who would betray us. You've probably had some stories or movies that you've read or you've watched, and suddenly there's this unexpected twist where the person you thought was the good guy is actually the villain, and that's what they're accusing God here. We thought he was good, getting us out of Egypt, taking good care of us along the way to this point, but God is really the villain here. He's brought us here to deliver us. God is cruel. He can't be trusted. It really goes back to the first sin. That's why I said sin is rejecting the belief God is loving, because Adam and Eve were put into the Garden of Eden by a very loving God, had everything they needed, but the serpent's temptation was, you can't trust God. He's not being straight with you. He just said that so you wouldn't eat the forbidden fruit and become like him, and so that bit of untrustworthiness that takes place. So you'll see there on your outline, I say here is a biblical example of a conspiracy theory. It's really where you connect some dots in the most sinister way that says, in this case, in God's case, God's not for us, He's against us. He's out to get us in some way. He's conspiring in all that He's been doing. He's not a good God. He's an evil God. He's not a loving God. And so that is at the heart of sin, isn't that? We don't trust God. We don't take Him at His word, and we don't believe that He is acting in His great love for us. Now, you can believe a conspiracy theory about me, or you can believe a conspiracy theory about another person, or maybe an entity, but don't believe a conspiracy theory that involves God. He is a God of love and compassion and cares for us deeply. And so our rebellion against Him is saying we really don't trust Him. We really don't believe that He has our loving interest at heart. Third thing, God gives second chances. And aren't we glad that He does that? Because Moses tries to encourage them. They're disappointed, they're frightful, they're afraid and discouraged. And he says, "Then I said to you, do not be terrified, do not be afraid of them. The Lord your God, who is going before you, will fight for you, as He did for you in Egypt before your very eyes and in this wilderness. There you saw how God, the Lord your God, carried you as a father carries his son all the way you went until you reached this place." And you got to love that imagery. He says, it's like a father carrying a young child who couldn't carry themselves, couldn't defend themselves, couldn't provide for themselves. And now God is like that for those people. He has been a loving, caring father for them. But in response to that, you got that second chance now. It says, "In spite of this, you did not trust the Lord your God, who went ahead of you on your journey, a fire by night and a cloud by day, to search out places for you to camp and to show you the way you could go." It's part of that guidance, that leadership, that provision that God had been to them. And Moses is telling them, here's a second chance. Your first inclination's not good. You get another chance maybe to get it right. I put a blank there. So this is something like a mulligan, which is a golf term. A mulligan is a second chance to hit a golf shot, and you hit a mulligan when you've hit a bad shot. You say, "Well, I don't want to count that one. I want to take this one." So they responded badly, and it's like Moses, "Okay, here's a mulligan. Don't be discouraged. Try again some way." And I'm glad that our God is a God of second chances and sometimes third chances and sometimes 70 times 7 chances, an infinite number of chances because of His mercy and His grace toward us. The next point, you cannot have sin without consequences. If we are gung-ho that we are going to go our own way and not God's way, then there are difficulties and consequences that will happen. It says, "When the Lord heard what you said, He was angry and solemnly swore, 'No one from this evil generation shall see the good land I swore to give your ancestors, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh. He will see it, and I will give him and his descendants the land he set his feet on, because he followed the Lord wholeheartedly.'" And so there's the justice, if you would, the judgment that was placed upon the people. You're not going to get to go in there because of your response to them, except for, as he mentions there, Caleb, and Joshua is mentioned here in a second. Then Moses talks about his own story. "Because of you, the Lord became angry with me and said, 'You shall not enter it either. But your assistant, Joshua, son of Nun, will enter it. Encourage him, because he will lead Israel to inherit it. And the little ones that you said would be taken captive, your children who do not yet know good from bad, they will enter the land. I will give it to them, and they will take possession of it. But as for you, turn around and set toward the desert along the route of the Red Sea." I wonder here, Moses is kind of retelling this story that took place close to 40 years before. And if he's kind of telling all their situation in his best light, because he says, "Because of you, the Lord became angry with me." And he doesn't mention an episode that we find again, you go to the book of Numbers there, about why God says He won't enter into the promised land. And it takes place when the Hebrew people were in what's called the desert of Zin. And in a desert, there was a need for water, and Aaron and Moses begged God, prayed to God, bowed before him. And here's what the Lord told him in response to Moses. There it is at verse 8 of, Numbers chapter 20. Take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water, and you will bring water out of the rock for the community, and they and their livestock can drink. But to the letter, Moses doesn't do that. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence just as he commanded. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock? Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and the livestock drank. Now, if you go to the country of Jordan, near the town of Petra, which is an amazing place to see, there is a stop along the way where they will show you what is thought to be, or claimed to be, the spot where that story took place, where Moses struck the rock, and there's a spring there and a rock there, and at least reminds us of the story that takes place there. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land that I give them. And so on what might seem a technicality, they were told, you didn't speak to the rock, you struck the rock, so you're not going to get to go in either. Now, Moses says there in Deuteronomy, because of you, and maybe it's because, golly, you rebellious people, you're always complaining and bellyaching about things, and it just got to me, and it's almost like, look what you made me do. You can say that at some points, but still, you did it. So it's just kind of a reminder to the overall people, here's their judgment. You're not going. You're going to be wanderers in the wilderness until the next generation comes along. And now later Moses, because of his failure to obey as completely as God told him to, he's not going to get to go in. Before we move on, I do want to say there is a note there that it talks not about that every person that's alive at Kadesh Barnea for the Hebrew people are not going in the promised land. It does mention your children who do not know good from bad, they will enter the land. So the judgment is kind of reserved and not given to the small children, and we use that text sometimes to talk about an age of accountability. That if you don't have a place where you've come to a point of understanding and responsibility for your decisions, you're not reached an age of accountability, and so excuse me, and so that's kind of one of the places there we see where God shows some mercy to those who were part of the Hebrews at that time, but not part of that decision. Next lesson. God's decisions are absolute. Once the consequences were given and they really didn't like that alternative there, people changed their minds. Then you replied, We've sinned against the Lord. We will go up and fight as the Lord our God commanded us. So every one of you put on his weapons, thinking it easy to go up into the hill country. But the Lord said to me, Tell them, do not go up and fight, because I will not be with them. You will be defeated by your enemies. My favorite command on a computer program is the undo button, because I know I can make a mistake and then I can hit undo. And they wanted to hit the undo button at this point, but there was no undo button. It's kind of like maybe in sending a text message and you push send and you say, oh, wow, I wish I hadn't sent that, but there's no unsend button that you can bring it back. It's out, and it's absolute, and God's judgment, what he says is the final word, isn't it? So verse 43, we're warned, don't try this without God. He's not going to go with you. And so Moses says, I told you, but you would not listen. You rebelled against the Lord's command, kind of again, and in your arrogance, you marched up to the hill country. The Amorites who lived in those hills came out against you. They chased you like a swarm of bees and beat you down from Seir all the way to Hormah. You came back and wept before the Lord. And notice what it says about God here. He paid no attention to your weeping and turned a deaf ear to you. And you stayed in Kadesh many days, all the time you spent there. It's this feeble attempt. I wrote that in on your notes. This feeble attempt to do without God what could only be accomplished with God. A failure to believe that God wouldn't lead them to a place, that he would not supply them the strength and the grace to do what was within his will. And now here he says, I'm not going with you. I'm not going to be there. And when they come back in regret and kind of licking their wounds and in mourning, weeping before the Lord, he's pretty indifferent and cold at that point. He turned a deaf ear. Sometimes in parenting, if your child has done something and is suffering from the consequences of their disobedience, it's not the time in parenthood to kind of show a whole lot of TLC, tender love and care, in tangible ways. You kind of have to let them deal quietly with their consequences of their wrongs. That's good parenting. I think in a way God's doing that. I wrote a paper in seminary about the passive wrath of God. That God's wrath isn't necessarily when he's like throwing lightning bolts and causing bad things to happen, but just when he distances himself, he stops investing in interjecting in our life in positive ways, then all the consequences that fall around behind it. As I say there, you may have heard me say this before, the saddest day in your life is when God says to you, thy will be done. And here's kind of that situation. They weren't going to go, and then they regretted, and now they're going, and God said, don't go now. It's really some of the saddest words you'll ever hear, the words too late. It's too late, and it was. His judgment was absolute, and so thy will be done, and they dealt with the consequences that take place. In closing, I just want to make an observation here that I think is meaningful, and that is there is a difference between unbelief and just honest doubt. What we really find here is unbelief, just a rebellion against the Lord, wasn't it? Is that God can't be trusted. He's not our advocate. He's conspiring against us. And boy, that is unbelief. And when there's unbelief, you run away from God. But I think there is honest doubt. When God's ways are beyond our ability to fathom, and I can't figure out what's going on or what's happening or why this is or why God would ask me to do that, and it's just not making sense to me because his ways are so much higher than ours. Okay, I have concerns, struggles, doubts. I think we're all there. But that causes us to lean into God, to say, okay, in spite of this, I'm going to pursue what you want. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to pray to you. I'm not running away from you. I'm in my doubt. I'm leaning, into you. And I think in that there comes a place where there is, better answers and a better place than we had ever be with these folks who at that time said, we're rejecting God. We don't think he is good. We don't think he cares. That great story in the Gospels where the man asks Jesus to heal his son, and Jesus says, anything's possible if you believe. And the man says, I believe. And then he gets honest and says, but help my unbelief. And I believe a Christian will say that oftentimes to the Lord. I believe, but please help my unbelief. Now, I close there on the bottom of your outline with, I call this my zinger. Not all my sermons and Bible studies have a zinger, but this one has a zinger. So if you want to summarize what the lesson is about, it can be done in these words. When God says go, don't say no. So pay attention to the heart and will of God. Be listening to him. Know what he wants us to do. Seek his will, seek his way. And when God says go, don't make the mistake of the Hebrew people at Kadesh, Barnea, and say no. Instead, go. This is Jay McCluskey. I look forward to our next study, joining you the next time. Have a great day.